What if the greatest dangers Harry faced were not always dark creatures or powerful curses, but the people he trusted most? In the world of Harry Potter series, betrayal does not always come from enemies, but from friends, mentors, and even those meant to protect him. Some choices were driven by fear, others by power, and some by love that went too far. Each one left a mark, shaping Harry's journey in ways he could never fully escape. But here is the question that lingers. Were they all truly betrayers, or were some simply lost in their own struggles? To understand Harry's story, we must look closer at the moments where trust broke and what remained after. The nature of betrayal in Harry's world. In the world of Harry Potter series, betrayal is not always loud, and it is not always easy to see, because it often moves quietly beneath moments that seem normal at first, hidden behind familiar faces, soft voices, and choices that appear reasonable until their consequences begin to unfold. When we think of betrayal, we often imagine something clear and immediate, like a sudden turning away or a direct act of harm. But in Harry's world, betrayal is much more complicated, because it is deeply connected to trust, to loyalty, and to the simple need to survive in a world that is often uncertain and dangerous. Trust, in its simplest form, is the belief that someone will not harm you, that they will protect you when they can, and that they will stand beside you when things become difficult. And for a child like Harry Potter, trust is not just important, it is necessary, because from the very beginning of his life, he is placed in situations where he must rely on others to guide him, to protect him, and to help him understand a world that he did not choose to be part of. Loyalty, on the other hand, is the action that follows trust. Because it is not enough to simply believe in someone, as loyalty is what proves that belief, through choices, through sacrifices, and through the willingness to remain even when leaving would be easier. Betrayal begins in the space where trust and loyalty break apart. And this break does not always happen in a dramatic way, because sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it is slow, and sometimes it is hidden behind reasons that feel right in the moment, even if they lead to harm later. In Harry's world, betrayal is often tied to survival, because many of the people around him are not just making simple choices between right and wrong, but are instead making decisions under pressure, under fear, and under the weight of consequences that may not only affect them, but also the people they care about. From the moment Harry is born, his life is shaped by something he does not fully understand, something that follows him even before he can speak, and that is the prophecy, the quiet but powerful connection between him and Lord Voldemort, which creates a path that seems already decided, even though Harry himself has no control over it. This prophecy does not simply place him in danger, it also places him in a position where others begin to see him, not just as a child, but as a symbol, as a key to something larger, and sometimes as a responsibility that must be handled carefully, even if that care comes at a cost. Because of this, Harry grows up in a world where people do not always treat him as just Harry, but instead treat him as someone who must be protected, guided, or even used, depending on what they believe is necessary. And this creates a unique kind of vulnerability, because it means that the people he trusts may not always be acting for him alone, but for something bigger than him, something that he does not fully understand until much later. This is where betrayal becomes difficult to define, because when someone keeps a secret to protect you, is that betrayal or is it love? And when someone makes a decision that leads to harm, but does so out of fear, are they betraying you or are they simply trying to survive? In Harry's world, betrayal often hides behind protection, because many of the adults around him believe that keeping certain truths from him is the best way to keep him safe. And while this may seem reasonable, it also creates distance, because trust cannot fully grow in the presence of silence. And when Harry begins to realize that important pieces of his life have been hidden from him, the feeling that follows is not just confusion, but a quiet sense of being left out of his own story. Protection, when taken too far, can begin to feel like control, and control, even when it comes from care, can still break trust. Fear is another place where betrayal often begins, because fear changes the way people think, and it can make them choose safety over truth or survival over loyalty. And in a world where danger is real and constant, fear is not something that can easily be ignored. Many of the people in Harry's life are shaped by fear, whether it is fear of loss, fear of power, or fear of what might happen if they make the wrong choice. And this fear can lead them to act in ways that they might not have chosen under different circumstances. In these moments, betrayal is not always intentional, but it still exists because the result is the same: a breaking of trust, a turning away, or a failure to stand where they were expected to stand. Love, perhaps the most surprising place where betrayal can hide, is also one of the most complicated, because love is often seen as something pure and good, something that protects and guides. And in many ways, this is true, but love can also lead people to make difficult choices that may hurt someone in the short term, in the hope of protecting them in the long term. In Harry's life, love is not simple, because it is often tied to sacrifice, to secrecy, and to decisions that are made without his knowledge. And while these decisions may come from a place of care, they can still feel like betrayal when their impact is finally understood. As Harry grows older, he begins to see that betrayal is not always about enemies, because sometimes it comes from the people who are closest to him, the people he trusts the most. And this realization is not sudden, but gradual, unfolding over time as he learns more about the world around him and the people within it. This does not make those people villains, but it does make their choices more complex, because they exist in a space where right and wrong are not always clear, and where every decision carries weight. The idea of survival is always present in Harry's world, and it shapes the way people act, because when survival is at stake, the lines between loyalty and betrayal can become blurred, and choices that might seem wrong in a safe world can begin to feel necessary in a dangerous one. This does not excuse betrayal, but it helps explain it, because understanding why someone makes a choice does not mean agreeing with it, but it does allow us to see the full picture, to see the fear, the pressure, and the uncertainty that led to that moment. For Harry, growing up in this world means learning to navigate these complexities, learning to trust while knowing that trust can be broken, and learning to understand that people are not always what they seem, not because they are pretending, but because they themselves are still trying to figure out who they are and what they must do. This creates a kind of quiet strength within him, because despite everything, despite the moments of betrayal, both large and small, he continues to trust, continues to care, and continues to believe in the possibility of loyalty, even when it is difficult. In the end, betrayal in Harry's world is not just about the act itself, but about the reasons behind it, the consequences that follow, and the way it shapes the people involved. And as we move forward through this journey, we begin to see that each betrayal, no matter how big or small, leaves a mark, not just on Harry, but on the world around him, shaping the path ahead in ways that are not always clear at first, but become impossible to ignore as the story unfolds. Petunia Dursley, Quiet Resentment. In the quiet, ordinary streets of Privet Drive, where everything is meant to look neat, controlled, and perfectly normal, there exists a kind of silence that feels heavier than noise, a silence that hides small truths beneath polite smiles and tidy routines. And within this silence lives Petunia Dursley, a woman who builds her life around the idea of being normal, even if that means pushing away everything that does not fit into that idea, even if that means turning away from parts of her own past that once mattered more than she is willing to admit. Before Harry ever arrives at her doorstep, Petunia is already carrying something inside her, something that has been growing quietly over the years, something shaped by her relationship with her sister, Lily Potter, a relationship that began with closeness and wonder, but slowly changed into something more complicated, something filled with distance, longing, and a quiet kind of jealousy that never fully faded. As children, Petunia once stood beside Lily and watched magic unfold. watched things that could not be explained by ordinary rules, and for a moment, she was part of that world, even if only as an observer, even if only through her sister's experiences. But as time moved forward, that connection began to change, because Lily was invited into a world that Petunia could not enter, a world where magic was not just something to watch, but something to live, something to become. And this difference created a space between them, a space that slowly filled with feelings that Petunia did not fully understand or express, feelings of being left behind, of being less special, of being outside something that once felt close. Instead of holding on to that connection, Petunia began to turn away from it, not all at once, but gradually, as if each step away made it easier to forget, easier to reshape her world into something simpler, something that did not include magic at all. By the time Harry comes into her life, this quiet resentment has already settled deep within her, shaping the way she sees anything connected to magic, shaping the way she remembers her sister, and shaping the way she reacts to the child who carries so much of that past within him. Harry is not just a boy to Petunia, not just a child who needs care and guidance, but a reminder, a living connection to everything she chose to leave behind, everything she could not have, and everything she has tried to convince herself does not belong in her world. And so, her treatment of Harry is not loud or explosive in the way some forms of cruelty can be, but instead, it is quiet, controlled, and steady, like the rest of her life. And this is what makes it so difficult to notice at first, because it is hidden within routines, within everyday actions, within the simple way she chooses to treat him differently from her own son. Harry is given less, spoken to less kindly, and often made to feel like he does not fully belong. But all of this is done in a way that can easily be explained away, in a way that can appear normal to someone looking from the outside. This is where emotional neglect begins to take shape, not through one single act, but through a pattern, through repeated moments, where care is withheld, where attention is limited, and where kindness is given in small, controlled amounts, if at all. Petunia does not openly declare her resentment. She does not explain her feelings, but instead, she lets them guide her actions in subtle ways, ways that build over time, ways that create a quiet distance between her and Harry that grows wider with each passing year. What makes this form of neglect even more complicated is the way it is disguised as normalcy, because Petunia believes deeply in the idea of being normal, of fitting into the expectations of the world around her, and in doing so, she creates a version of life that appears proper and orderly, even if it lacks warmth, even if it lacks the kind of care that a child needs to feel safe and valued. To her, providing a roof over Harry's head, feeding him, and keeping him within the structure of her home may feel like enough, may feel like she is fulfilling her responsibility, even if she is withholding something more important, something less visible, but just as necessary. This creates a kind of quiet betrayal, one that is not built on direct harm, but on absence, on what is not given rather than what is taken away. And for Harry, this absence becomes something he learns to live with, something he accepts without fully understanding, because he has no other experience to compare it to, no other version of care to measure it against. He grows up in a space where love is not clearly shown, where kindness is limited, and where he is constantly reminded, in small ways, that he is different, that he is separate, and that he does not fully belong. Petunia's actions are not driven by a simple desire to harm, but by something more complex, something rooted in her own past, in her own feelings of being excluded and overlooked. And this is what makes her betrayal difficult to define, because it is not intentional in the way we might expect. But it is still real, still present, and still shaping Harry's early life in ways that cannot be ignored. Her bitterness does not explode outward, but instead settles into her choices, into the way she speaks, into the way she decides what Harry deserves and what he does not. There are moments, however small, where it becomes clear that Petunia's connection to her past has not fully disappeared. Moments where the memory of her sister, of the world she once glimpsed, surfaces quietly beneath her controlled exterior. And in these moments, It is possible to see that her feelings are not simple, that beneath the resentment, there may still be something else, something unspoken, something that she has chosen not to face directly. But instead of allowing that feeling to grow, instead of allowing it to change her actions, she continues to hold on to the version of normal she has built, even if it means continuing the pattern that keeps Harry at a distance. For Harry, growing up under Petunia's care means learning to exist within this quiet tension, learning to navigate a world where he is present but not fully accepted, where he is cared for in the most basic sense, but not in the way that allows him to feel truly valued. This shapes the way he sees himself, the way he understands relationships, and the way he approaches trust. Because when care is inconsistent or distant, it becomes difficult to know what to expect from others. In the larger story, Petunia's role may seem small compared to the dangers that Harry will later face, but her influence is important because it forms the foundation of his early experiences, the first understanding he has of family, of belonging, and of what it means to be treated as less than someone else. This early experience does not define him completely, but it does leave a mark, a quiet reminder of how easily trust can be weakened, not through dramatic betrayal, but through the slow and steady absence of care. In the end, Petunia's betrayal is not one of action, but of omission, not of direct harm, but of withheld kindness. And while it may not carry the same weight as other betrayals in Harry's life, it is still significant because it shapes the way his story begins, shaping the way he learns to see the world, and shaping the way he understands the difference between simply living and truly belonging. Vernon Dursley, Cruel Control. In the carefully ordered world of Privet Drive, where lawns are trimmed to match one another and curtains are drawn just enough to suggest privacy without inviting curiosity, there is a constant effort to keep everything predictable, everything controlled, and everything exactly as it should be. And at the center of this effort stands Vernon Dursley, a man who believes deeply in rules, in routine, and in the idea that anything unusual must be pushed away before it has a chance to disturb the calm surface of his life. For Vernon, normal is not just a preference, but a kind of shield, a way to keep the world simple and understandable. And anything that does not fit into that definition becomes something to fear, something to reject, and eventually something to fight against. When Harry enters his home, he is not seen as a child who has lost his parents and needs care and understanding, but as a problem that must be managed, a presence that brings with it the risk of something strange, something uncontrolled, something that Vernon has already decided does not belong in his world. From the very beginning, Vernon's approach to Harry is shaped by this need to control, and this control is not gentle or flexible, but firm and often harsh, built on the belief that if something is ignored long enough or pushed down hard enough, it will eventually disappear. Harry's identity, even before it is fully revealed, is something that Vernon works actively to suppress, because there are small signs, small moments that suggest that Harry is not like other children, moments that hint at something beyond the ordinary. And each of these moments is met not with curiosity, but with resistance. When strange things happen around Harry, when events occur that cannot be explained in simple terms, Vernon does not pause to consider what they might mean, but instead reacts with anger, with denial, and with a stronger effort to keep everything under control. This suppression is not always loud, though it can be, especially in moments where Vernon feels that his authority is being challenged, but it is often steady and consistent, woven into the structure of Harry's daily life, into the rules that are placed upon him, into the limitations that define what he is allowed to do and how he is allowed to exist within the house. Harry is given a space that is smaller, a life that is more restricted, and an identity that is shaped not by who he is, but by what Vernon decides he should be. And this creates a kind of quiet pressure, a constant reminder that there are parts of Harry that are not accepted, parts that must be hidden or denied if he is to remain within the boundaries of the Dursley home. At the heart of this behavior is fear, a deep and persistent fear of magic, a fear that Vernon does not fully explain, but one that is clear in the way he reacts to anything connected to it. Magic, to Vernon, is not something wonderful or exciting, but something dangerous, something that disrupts order, something that cannot be controlled, and therefore must be rejected completely. This fear does not remain calm or distant, but slowly grows into hostility, because fear that is not understood often turns into anger, and anger seeks something to push against, something to blame. Harry becomes that focus, not because he chooses to be, but because he represents everything Vernon fears, everything that threatens the normal life he has built so carefully. Instead of seeing Harry as a child with a unique connection to a different world, Vernon sees him as a risk, a reminder that the world is not as simple as he wants it to be, and so he responds in the only way he knows how, by trying to remove that complexity, by trying to force Harry into a shape that fits within his understanding of normal. This effort to deny Harry's truth becomes one of the clearest forms of betrayal, because it is not just about control, but about refusing to acknowledge who Harry really is, refusing to accept a fundamental part of his identity. When the letters from Hogwarts begin to arrive, each one carrying the truth of Harry's place in the magical world, Vernon's reaction is not one of confusion or even cautious interest, but of immediate rejection, a determined effort to stop the truth from reaching Harry, to keep him from discovering who he is meant to become. The act of hiding those letters, of preventing Harry from reading them, is not just an attempt to delay something inevitable, but a deliberate choice to deny Harry access to his own story, to his own future. And in doing so, Vernon takes something important away from him, something that no one has the right to control. This is where the betrayal becomes clear, because it is not just about fear or misunderstanding, but about a refusal to allow Harry to be himself, a refusal to let him step into a world where he belongs. Even as the truth becomes harder to hide, even as the presence of the magical world begins to press more strongly against the walls of Privet Drive, Vernon continues to resist, continues to push back, as if holding on tightly enough will keep everything the same. But this resistance is not without consequences, because the more he tries to control Harry, the more tension builds, the more the difference between who Harry is and who Vernon wants him to be becomes impossible to ignore. There is something deeply revealing in the way Vernon approaches this situation, because it shows that his actions are not random or careless, but intentional, guided by a belief that he is protecting his family, protecting his home, and protecting the life he values. In his own mind, he may see his actions as necessary, as justified, even as responsible, and this is what makes the betrayal more complex, because it is not done with the purpose of causing harm, but with the belief that harm is being prevented. But intention does not erase impact, and no matter how Vernon justifies his actions, the effect on Harry remains the same, a sense of being controlled, of being limited, and of being denied the chance to understand himself fully. Growing up in this environment, Harry learns to hide parts of himself, to question what is happening around him, and to accept a version of life that does not match what he feels inside. And this creates a quiet confusion, a feeling that something is not quite right, even if he cannot yet explain why. As time passes and Harry begins to step into the magical world, the contrast becomes clearer. The difference between what he was told and what is true becomes impossible to ignore. And this is where the weight of Vernon's actions begins to settle more fully, because Harry is able to see not just what was hidden from him, but what was denied, what was kept away, and what that absence meant for his early life. Vernon's betrayal, then, is not one of sudden action, but of ongoing control, of repeated choices that shape Harry's understanding of himself and his place in the world. It is a betrayal rooted in fear, strengthened by denial, and carried out through the steady suppression of truth. And while it may not involve the same kind of danger as the threats Harry will later face, it is still significant because it forms the foundation of his early experiences, the first challenge he must overcome in order to become who he truly is. In the end, Vernon's role in Harry's story is a reminder that betrayal does not always come from enemies, and it does not always appear in obvious ways. because sometimes it exists in the quiet control of everyday life, in the denial of truth, and in the refusal to accept what is different. And it is within these quiet moments that some of the most lasting effects are created, shaping not only how Harry sees the world, but how he learns to stand against it. Marge Dursley, verbal violence. There are some kinds of harm that do not leave marks on the skin, that do not break bones or cause visible injury, but instead move quietly through words, through tone, through the way a person chooses to speak, and the way those words are allowed to settle and remain long after they are spoken. And in the life of Harry Potter, one of the clearest examples of this kind of harm arrives in the form of Marge Dursley, a woman whose presence in the Dursley home brings with it a different kind of cruelty, one that is loud, direct, and often dismissed as simple opinion, even though its impact reaches much deeper than it first appears. Marge does not live in the house every day, and this makes her influence feel temporary at first, something that comes and goes, something that might be endured and then forgotten. But the reality is that her visits create moments that stay with Harry long after she leaves, moments that shape the way he understands himself, the way he sees his past, and the way he feels within the only place he is told is his home. Unlike the quiet control of Vernon Dursley or the distant coldness of Petunia Dursley, Marge's cruelty is open, spoken clearly, and delivered with a kind of confidence that makes it difficult to challenge because it is presented as truth rather than opinion. From the moment she begins to speak about Harry, there is a clear pattern in the way she chooses her words, a pattern that focuses not only on him, but on his parents, especially on the parts of his past that he cannot defend because he does not fully know them himself. She speaks about his father, James Potter, and his mother, Lily Potter, in ways that reduce them to simple, negative ideas, turning them into stories that are easy to dismiss, easy to judge, and easy to use as a reason to explain Harry's behavior in a way that removes his individuality and replaces it with something inherited, something that cannot be changed. This is where the cruelty becomes more than just unkindness, because it is not limited to a single moment or a single insult, but instead builds a narrative, a repeated message that suggests that Harry is not just different, but flawed in a way that comes from his origins, a way that is beyond his control and therefore something he cannot fix. Marge speaks with certainty, with the kind of tone that does not invite disagreement, and because she is an adult, because she is accepted within the family, her words are allowed to exist without challenge, creating an environment where Harry must listen without response, must absorb what is said without the space to question it. The impact of this kind of verbal treatment is not immediate in a visible way, but it settles slowly, shaping the way Harry feels about himself, especially during the early years, when he has little understanding of his own past and few sources of information that might offer a different perspective. When a child hears the same kind of message repeatedly, especially from someone in a position of authority, it becomes difficult to separate truth from opinion. And even if Harry does not fully believe what Marge says, there is still a weight to her words, a lingering effect that cannot simply be ignored. Humiliation plays a central role in the way Marge interacts with Harry, because her comments are often made in front of others, often delivered in a way that invites laughter or agreement, turning private feelings into public moments. And in doing so, she creates a space where Harry is not just criticized, but exposed, placed in a position where he is expected to accept what is being said, while those around him treat it as normal conversation. This kind of experience does not just hurt in the moment, but creates a deeper sense of discomfort, a feeling of being watched, of being judged, and of not having control over how one is seen by others. The emotional effect of this kind of treatment builds over time, because it is not just about what is said, but about what is reinforced. The idea that Harry's place within the family is uncertain, that he is not equal, and that he must accept a lower position without question. Each visit from Marge becomes another reminder of this dynamic, another moment where Harry is made to feel separate, where he is reminded that he does not fully belong, even within the only family he has known. What makes this situation even more complex is the way the rest of the household responds, or rather, does not respond, because the absence of correction, the lack of defense, becomes a silent agreement, a signal that Marge's words are acceptable, or at least not important enough to challenge. Vernon Dursley often supports or encourages her views, while Petunia Dursley remains distant, allowing the conversation to continue without interruption. And this creates an environment where Harry stands alone, without support, without reassurance, and without a voice that speaks in his defense. This silence is important because it reinforces the isolation that Harry already feels, turning what might have been a single difficult interaction into a repeated experience of being left out, of being unprotected, and of being expected to endure without complaint. In a different environment, in a space where someone might step in, where someone might say that the words are not fair or not true, the impact might be lessened. But in this house, in this setting, the absence of that support makes the experience heavier, more lasting, and more difficult to process. Marge's cruelty is often presented as something simple, something that comes from her personality, something that can be explained as harshness or bluntness. But when looked at more closely, it becomes clear that it carries a deeper impact, because it shapes not only how Harry is treated, but how he is expected to see himself. Her words create a version of Harry that is defined by others, a version that is based on judgment rather than understanding, and this version is placed in front of him repeatedly, as if it is something he must accept. There is also a sense of imbalance in the way she speaks, because while she is quick to criticize and judge, she does not seek to understand, does not ask questions, and does not consider that there may be more to Harry's story than what she assumes. This lack of curiosity, this refusal to look beyond surface ideas, turns her words into something fixed, something that does not change or grow, and because of this, her cruelty feels final, as if there is no room for Harry to be seen differently. For Harry, growing up with these moments means learning to manage not only physical discomfort or restriction, but emotional pressure, the kind that builds quietly and becomes part of daily life, the kind that teaches him to stay quiet, to avoid attention, and to endure rather than respond. These lessons are not taught directly, but are learned through experience, through repeated exposure to situations where speaking up does not lead to change, and where silence becomes the safest option. As time passes, and Harry begins to understand more about his parents, about who they really were and the lives they lived, the contrast between Marge's words and the truth becomes clearer. And this creates a new layer of understanding because it reveals that her cruelty was not based on knowledge, but on assumption, not on fact, but on judgment. This realization does not erase the impact of her words, but it does offer a different perspective, a way for Harry to separate himself from the version of him that was presented to him during those early years. In the larger story, Marge's role may seem limited, her presence short compared to the many challenges Harry will face later, but the effect of her actions is still important, because it highlights a form of betrayal that is often overlooked, the kind that exists in words, in tone, in the repeated dismissal of someone's identity and worth. It shows that harm does not always come from grand actions or dramatic events, but can also come from simple, repeated moments of disrespect, from the steady reinforcement of ideas that place one person above another. In the end, Marge's treatment of Harry serves as a reminder that words have weight, that the way we speak about others can shape how they see themselves, and that even in environments that appear ordinary, even in homes that seem stable, there can exist a kind of quiet harm that is easy to miss, but difficult to forget. And it is within these quiet moments that some of the deepest effects are created, shaping not only how Harry experiences his early life, but how he learns to recognize and resist the voices that seek to define him without truly knowing who he is. Cornelius Fudge, Denial over Truth. There are moments in the wizarding world when danger does not arrive with loud footsteps or clear warnings, but instead moves quietly through decisions made in offices, through conversations held behind closed doors, and through the choices of those who are meant to protect others. And one of the clearest examples of this kind of hidden danger can be seen in the actions of Cornelius Fudge, a man who holds power not through strength or wisdom alone, but through position, through influence, and through the trust that others place in him to lead during uncertain times. At first, Fudge does not appear as someone who would betray that trust, because he presents himself as reasonable, as calm, and as someone who wants to maintain order within the magical world. And in many ways, he does believe that he is doing what is right, or at least what is necessary. But the problem begins when the truth becomes uncomfortable, when reality no longer fits into the safe and controlled image he wants to preserve. And instead of adjusting his understanding to match what is happening, he begins to reshape the truth itself, choosing what is easier to accept rather than what is real. The return of Lord Voldemort is not just a simple event, but a moment that changes everything, a moment that signals the beginning of a new and dangerous period. And for many, this truth is difficult to accept, because it brings with it fear, uncertainty, and the need to act in ways that may lead to conflict and loss. For Fudge, however, the difficulty of this truth becomes something more than fear. It becomes something he cannot allow himself to fully believe, because accepting it would mean admitting that the world is no longer safe, that his leadership may be tested, and that the stability he has worked to maintain is already beginning to break. Instead of facing this reality, Fudge chooses a different path, one that is built on denial, on the decision to reject what does not fit his expectations. And this choice is not made in a single moment, but develops over time, as he hears reports, as he listens to those around him, and as he begins to feel the pressure of what the truth might require from him. Denial, in this case, becomes a form of protection, not for others, but for himself, a way to avoid the responsibility that comes with acknowledging danger, and a way to hold on to power without having to confront the risks that power demands. This is where the betrayal begins to take shape, because when a leader refuses to accept reality, the consequences do not remain with that leader alone, but spread outward, affecting everyone who relies on that leadership for safety and guidance. Fudge's refusal to accept Voldemort's return is not just a personal choice, but a decision that influences the entire Ministry of Magic, shaping how information is shared, how actions are taken, and how threats are understood. One of the most important parts of this situation is the way Fudge responds to those who speak the truth, especially Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore, both of whom try to warn others about what is happening, both of whom present information that challenges Fudge's version of events. Instead of listening, instead of considering that they might be right, Fudge begins to see them as a problem, as voices that disrupt the sense of control he is trying to maintain, and because of this, he chooses to oppose them rather than support them. This opposition is not quiet or subtle, but active and deliberate, as Fudge uses his position to shape public opinion, to influence what people believe, and to create a narrative that presents Harry and Dumbledore not as protectors, but as sources of confusion, or even as threats to stability. Through the ministry, he spreads doubt, encourages skepticism, and allows fear to be redirected, not toward the real danger, but toward those who are trying to expose it. In doing this, Fudge turns the ministry itself into a tool of denial, a system that no longer serves the purpose of protection, but instead works to maintain a false sense of safety, even if that safety is built on ignoring the truth. This is a powerful form of betrayal, because it does not rely on direct harm, but on misinformation, on the careful shaping of what is believed, and on the use of authority to make that belief feel real and unquestionable. For Harry, this experience is especially difficult, because it places him in a position where he must not only face the return of Voldemort, but also the rejection of the very system that should be supporting him. He speaks the truth, he shares what he has seen, and instead of being heard, he is doubted, questioned, and even treated as if he is the problem. This creates a sense of isolation, a feeling that the world he is trying to protect does not fully trust him, and that the truth he carries is not enough to overcome the power of denial. For Dumbledore, the situation is equally complex because he understands the danger clearly and he sees the consequences of Fudge's actions long before they fully unfold. But even with his wisdom and experience, he cannot force the Ministry to change its position, and this creates a tension between knowledge and power, between understanding and influence. Dumbledore continues to act in the best way he can, but the lack of support from the Ministry makes his task more difficult, and the delay in action allows the threat to grow stronger. Fudge's choice to turn against Harry and Dumbledore is not driven by simple hatred or malice, but by a combination of fear, pride, and the desire to maintain control. And this is what makes his betrayal more complex, because it is rooted in human weakness rather than clear intention. He does not see himself as a villain, but as someone protecting the system, someone maintaining order, even as that system begins to fail, because it is built on a denial of reality. As time passes, the truth becomes harder to ignore, and the signs of Voldemort's return become clearer. But by this point, the delay has already caused damage, because valuable time has been lost. Opportunities to prepare have been missed, and the trust between people has been weakened. The cost of denial is not just measured in what is avoided, but in what is allowed to grow in its absence. And in this case, the danger that Fudge refused to accept becomes stronger because it was not faced early enough. In the end, Fudge's story is not just about one man's failure, but about the danger of choosing comfort over truth, about the risk of allowing fear to shape decisions, and about the way power can be used not only to protect, but to hide from reality. His actions show that betrayal does not always come from clear enemies, but can also come from those who are trusted, from those who are expected to lead, and from those who choose what is easy over what is necessary. For Harry, this experience becomes another lesson, another moment where trust is tested and where the difference between truth and belief becomes clear, and while he continues to move forward, continues to stand for what he knows is real, the impact of Fudge's choices remains, a reminder that even in a world filled with magic, the greatest dangers can sometimes come not from dark forces alone, but from the refusal to see them for what they truly are. Dolores Umbridge, authority as betrayal. In a world where rules are meant to guide and protect, where authority is expected to bring order and fairness, there comes a moment when those same rules begin to feel heavy, not because they are wrong in themselves, but because of how they are used. And in the halls of Hogwarts, that shift becomes clear through the presence of Dolores Umbridge, a figure who does not rely on loud threats or open violence, but instead uses structure, procedure, and quiet control to reshape the environment around her, turning what should be a place of learning into something far more restrictive and uneasy. At first, Umbridge presents herself as calm, polite, and even gentle in her manner, speaking in a soft voice, smiling often, and dressing in a way that suggests warmth rather than authority. But beneath this surface lies something far more rigid, a strict belief in control, in obedience, and in the idea that order must be maintained at all costs, even if that order ignores the truth. Her power does not come from strength or skill in magic alone, but from her connection to the Ministry, from the authority she carries into the school, and from the willingness to use that authority without hesitation. When she arrives at Hogwarts, she does not simply take on the role of a teacher, but begins to change the structure of the school itself, introducing new rules, new limitations, and new expectations that shift the balance of power away from the students and even away from the other teachers, placing herself at the center of control. These changes are not random, but carefully chosen, designed to limit what can be said, what can be taught, and what can be questioned. And in doing so, she creates an environment where silence becomes safer than truth. One of the most important aspects of Umbridge's role is the way she uses institutional power, the authority given to her by the Ministry, to enforce her version of reality. And this is where her actions begin to move from strictness into betrayal, because instead of using her position to support students and encourage learning, she uses it to restrict, to punish, and to reshape the narrative of what is happening in the wizarding world. Her lessons avoid practical defense, avoid preparation for real danger, and instead focus on controlled theory, as if danger itself can be removed simply by refusing to acknowledge it. For Harry Potter, this shift is immediate and deeply personal because he carries knowledge that Umbridge refuses to accept. Knowledge of Lord Voldemort's return, knowledge that comes not from rumor or fear, but from direct experience. When Harry speaks this truth, when he attempts to share what he has seen, he is not met with concern or careful listening, but with rejection, with a firm insistence that he is wrong and that his words are not just incorrect, but dangerous. This is where the punishment begins, not because Harry has broken a rule in the usual sense, but because he has challenged the version of reality that Umbridge is trying to enforce, and in her view, this challenge cannot be allowed to continue. Instead of engaging with his claims, instead of investigating or questioning, she moves directly to discipline, using her authority to silence him, to make it clear that speaking the truth is not acceptable within her system. The punishment she chooses is not loud or visible in a traditional sense, but quiet, controlled, and deeply personal, forcing Harry to write lines that deny his own experience, lines that repeat the idea that what he has said is false, and in doing so, she turns punishment into something more than correction, something that aims to reshape thought, to force agreement through repetition and discomfort. This method does not just target behavior, but belief, attempting to change not only what Harry says, but what he is allowed to think and remember. This is where authority becomes a tool of control rather than guidance, because instead of encouraging understanding, it demands silence, and instead of supporting truth, it replaces it with something easier to manage. Umbridge's actions show that rules, when used without care or fairness, can become weapons, tools that limit freedom rather than protect it, tools that enforce a version of reality that benefits those in power rather than those who are affected by it. The use of rules, in this way, creates an atmosphere where students begin to feel watched, where every action is measured against strict expectations, and where even small acts of independence can lead to punishment. Notices appear across the school, each one adding another layer of restriction, another boundary that students must not cross. And over time, these rules begin to shape behavior, encouraging silence, discouraging curiosity, and creating a sense that it is safer to follow than to question. For many students, this environment becomes one of quiet tension, where the joy of learning is replaced by caution, and where the fear of punishment becomes a constant presence. But for Harry, the situation is even more intense, because he is not just another student, but someone who has already been singled out, someone whose voice has already been challenged, and someone who continues to hold on to a truth that is not allowed to be spoken. What makes Umbridge's actions particularly powerful is the way they appear justified within the structure of the institution, because she does not break the rules openly, but instead creates new ones, uses existing ones, and operates within a system that allows her behavior to continue. This makes it difficult to oppose her, because any challenge to her authority can be framed as disobedience, and any attempt to resist can be punished under the same rules she has established. This creates a situation where authority protects itself, where the system that should prevent misuse instead supports it, and where those who are affected have limited ways to respond. In this way, betrayal becomes part of the structure itself, not just an individual action, but a pattern that is repeated and reinforced through the use of power. For Harry, this experience becomes another moment where trust is tested, where the expectation that authority will protect and guide is replaced by the reality that authority can also silence and control. He learns that speaking the truth is not always enough, that being right does not always lead to being believed, and that standing against power requires not only courage, but persistence. At the same time, this period also reveals something important about resistance, because while Umbridge works to enforce silence, there are those who continue to question, who continue to seek understanding, and who find ways to support each other even within the limits that have been placed upon them. This quiet resistance does not remove the control that Umbridge holds, but it creates small spaces where truth can still exist, where learning can still happen, and where the idea of fairness is not completely lost. In the larger story, Umbridge's role stands as a clear example of how authority, when used without care or honesty, can become a form of betrayal, because it takes the trust placed in it and uses that trust to limit, to control, and to reshape reality in a way that benefits power rather than truth. Her actions show that rules are not always neutral, that they can be shaped by those who enforce them, and that the line between order and oppression can become blurred when authority is not questioned. In the end, the impact of this experience remains, not only in the memories of those who lived through it, but in the understanding that authority must be held to the same standards it is meant to enforce, that truth cannot be replaced simply by denying it, and that even in the most controlled environments, there will always be those who continue to seek what is real, even when it is difficult, even when it is dangerous, and even when the system itself tries to say otherwise. The Ministry of Magic, systemic betrayal. In a world where people look to systems for protection, where laws are meant to guide actions and keep everyone safe, there is an expectation that those systems will stand on truth, that they will respond to danger with clarity, and that they will protect those who speak honestly. But in the case of the Ministry of Magic, there comes a moment when this expectation begins to break. Not all at once, but slowly, through decisions that seem small at first, through choices that feel temporary, until the pattern becomes clear and the system itself begins to move away from its purpose. The ministry is not a single person, not a single voice, but a collection of offices, departments, and individuals, all working together in a structure that is meant to represent order, stability, and control. And for a long time, it appears to do just that, creating a sense that the wizarding world is being managed carefully, that threats are being handled, and that those in charge understand what is happening. But systems are only as strong as the people who lead them, and when those leaders begin to act out of fear instead of understanding, the system begins to change in ways that are not always immediately visible. The failure to protect the truth does not begin with a clear decision to ignore it, but with hesitation, with doubt, and with the desire to avoid panic, because when the truth is difficult, when it carries the weight of danger and uncertainty, there is a strong temptation to delay it, to soften it, or to reshape it into something easier to accept. In the case of the ministry, this hesitation becomes something more serious, because instead of investigating fully, instead of preparing for the possibility that the danger is real, the leadership begins to choose a version of events that feels safer, even if it is not accurate. At the center of this situation is the return of Lord Voldemort, a reality that challenges everything the ministry claims to control. And for those in power, accepting this truth would mean admitting that the system has limits, that it cannot prevent every threat, and that the world is more unstable than it appears. Instead of facing this, the ministry begins to turn away from the truth, not completely at first, but enough to create doubt, enough to create confusion, and enough to delay the response that is needed. This is where systemic betrayal begins, because it is not just about one decision, but about a pattern of behavior that spreads through the structure, influencing how information is handled, how people are treated, and how reality is presented to the public. When a system fails to protect the truth, it does not simply remain neutral, but becomes part of the problem, because it allows false ideas to grow, it allows fear to shape decisions, and it prevents those who know the truth from being heard. One of the clearest examples of this failure can be seen in the way the ministry responds to Harry Potter, a young wizard who speaks openly about what he has witnessed, who shares information that should be taken seriously, and who represents a direct connection to the events that the ministry is trying to deny. Instead of listening, instead of considering that his words might be important, the ministry begins to question him, to doubt him, and eventually to work against him. This shift is not random, but carefully shaped through what can be described as a smear campaign, a deliberate effort to influence how people see Harry, to turn him from a source of truth into a source of uncertainty. And this is done not through direct confrontation, but through media, through statements, and through repeated suggestions that what he says cannot be trusted. The use of publications, like the Daily Prophet, becomes an important part of this process because it allows the ministry to shape public opinion, to guide what people believe, and to create a version of events that supports their position. In these reports, Harry is presented not as a witness, but as a confused or attention-seeking figure, someone whose words should be questioned rather than accepted. And over time, this repeated message begins to influence how others see him, creating distance between him and the wider community and making it more difficult for his truth to be heard. This is a powerful form of control because it does not silence him directly, but instead changes how his voice is received, turning doubt into a barrier that is difficult to overcome. At the same time, Albus Dumbledore, who supports Harry and shares his understanding of the situation, becomes another target of this effort because his influence and reputation make him a threat to the ministry's narrative. By questioning his intentions, by suggesting that he may be seeking power or acting outside his role, the ministry works to weaken his position, to reduce the trust that others place in him, and to create a sense that even those who have long been respected cannot be fully relied upon. This turning against their own people reveals something important about the nature of fear within a system, because when leaders are driven by fear, they often begin to see threats not only in external dangers, but in internal voices that challenge their control. Instead of working together, instead of using the knowledge and experience of those within the system, they begin to isolate, to divide, and to push away those who do not agree with their approach. Fear-driven leadership does not always appear as fear on the surface, because it is often hidden behind confidence, behind firm statements, and behind the appearance of control. But the decisions it produces reveal its presence, because they focus on maintaining stability rather than seeking truth, on preserving authority rather than addressing danger. In the case of the ministry, this fear leads to inaction at a time when action is needed, to denial at a time when clarity is required, and to conflict within the system itself. For the people living under this system, the impact is significant because it creates confusion, uncertainty, and a lack of trust, not only in leadership, but in the information they receive. When the truth is not protected, when it is changed or hidden, it becomes difficult to know what to believe, and this uncertainty weakens the ability of the community to respond effectively. Because without clear understanding, preparation becomes limited and reaction becomes delayed. For Harry, this experience adds another layer to his journey, because he is not only facing external danger, but also navigating a world where the system that should support him has turned against him, where his honesty is treated as a problem, and where his role becomes more isolated than ever. This isolation is not just physical, but emotional, because it separates him from the trust of others, creating a barrier that he must overcome through persistence and resilience. As events continue and the truth becomes more visible, as the signs of Voldemort's return can no longer be ignored, the failure of the ministry becomes clearer, not just in what it has done, but in what it has failed to do. The delay, the denial, and the division have all contributed to a situation that is more dangerous than it needed to be, and the cost of that failure is felt across the wizarding world. In the end, the ministry's role in this part of the story serves as a powerful reminder that systems are not automatically just or correct, that they must be guided by truth and accountability, and that when fear is allowed to shape decisions, even the strongest structures can begin to turn against their own purpose. This kind of betrayal is not loud or immediate, but slow and widespread, affecting many people at once, and leaving a lasting impact that continues even after the truth has finally been accepted. Peter Pettigrew, the first great betrayal. There are some moments in a story that feel like a turning point, not because they are loud or dramatic in the way we expect, but because everything that comes after them is shaped by what happened in that quiet, hidden choice. And in the world of Harry Potter series, one of the earliest and most important of these moments comes from the actions of Peter Pettigrew, a man who once stood close to friendship, who once belonged to a group built on trust, and who made a decision that would not only break that trust, but also change the course of many lives, including that of Harry Potter, before he was even old enough to understand what had been lost. To understand the weight of this betrayal, it is important to look at where Peter once stood, because he was not always seen as a traitor, not always known for fear or weakness, but instead was part of a close group that included James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin, a group that shared friendship, loyalty, and a sense of belonging during their time at Hogwarts. Within this group, Peter was not the strongest, not the most confident, and not the most skilled, but he was accepted, included, and protected, and this acceptance created a bond that should have been strong enough to last beyond their school years. But as time moved forward, and the world around them became more dangerous, as the rise of Lord Voldemort brought fear and uncertainty into every part of the wizarding world, the meaning of loyalty began to change, because it was no longer just about friendship, but about risk, about danger, and about the possibility of losing everything. For some, this strengthened their resolve, making them more determined to stand together. But for Peter, this growing danger had a different effect, because it revealed something that had always been there, something quiet and hidden beneath his role within the group, and that was fear. Fear, in itself, is not unusual, because many people feel it, especially in times of danger. But what matters is how that fear is handled, how it shapes decisions, and how it influences the choices a person makes when faced with difficult situations. In Peter's case, fear did not lead him to seek support or to strengthen his loyalty, but instead led him towards self-preservation, toward the idea that survival was more important than trust, and that aligning with power, even if that power was dangerous, might offer him a form of safety. This is where the first great betrayal begins to take shape, not in a single moment, but in a series of thoughts, doubts, and fears that build over time, leading Peter to make a decision that he might not have imagined in earlier days, but one that becomes possible as his fear grows stronger than his loyalty. When James and Lily needed protection, when they placed their trust in someone close to them, someone they believed would keep their secrets safe, that trust was given to Peter, a choice that seemed reasonable at the time, because he was part of their circle, part of their lives, and someone they believed would never turn against them. But trust, once given, becomes a responsibility, and in Peter's case, it was a responsibility he chose to break, because instead of protecting the secret, instead of standing firm in the face of danger, he chose to reveal it, to pass it to Voldemort, and in doing so, he set into motion a chain of events that would lead directly to the deaths of James and Lily. This decision was not forced in the sense of physical control, but driven by fear, by the belief that aligning with Voldemort would keep him safe, that betrayal would offer protection, even if it meant sacrificing the lives of those who had once trusted him completely. The moment itself, when the secret is given, is not filled with noise or visible conflict, but its impact is immediate and devastating, because it removes the protection that had been carefully placed, leaving James and Lily exposed to a danger they had been trying to avoid. Voldemort does not hesitate, because power moves quickly when given the opportunity, and the result is the loss of 2 lives, the destruction of a home, and the beginning of a story that will follow Harry for the rest of his life. What makes this betrayal so significant is not only the result, but the nature of the choice itself, because it comes from someone who was trusted, someone who was close, and someone who understood exactly what his actions would mean. This is not a betrayal based on misunderstanding or confusion, but one that involves a clear decision, a choice between loyalty and fear, and in that moment, fear is allowed to win. After this event, Peter does not step forward to face the consequences, does not attempt to correct what has been done, but instead chooses to hide, to disappear, and to create a new identity that allows him to avoid responsibility. His life becomes one of secrecy, of constant caution, and of dependence on others for protection. Because even though he chose survival, that survival is not free, but comes with a cost that follows him wherever he goes. Living in hiding, Peter becomes a shadow of who he once was, a person defined not by friendship or belonging, but by the need to remain unseen, to avoid attention, and to stay close to those who can offer protection. His choice does not bring him peace, but instead traps him in a state of ongoing fear. Because betrayal does not remove danger, it simply changes its form, turning external threats into internal ones, turning the fear of being harmed into the fear of being discovered. There is something deeply revealing in the way Peter continues to exist after his betrayal, because it shows that cowardice does not end with a single act, but continues, shaping behavior, shaping identity, and shaping the way a person moves through the world. He does not grow stronger after his decision, does not become more confident or secure, but instead remains small, cautious, and dependent, as if the choice he made has locked him into a version of himself that cannot easily change. For Harry, learning the truth about Peter is a moment of understanding, a realization that the loss of his parents was not only the result of an external enemy, but also of a broken trust, a betrayal from within. And this adds a new layer to his story, because it shows that danger does not always come from obvious sources, but can also come from those who are close, from those who are trusted, and from those who are expected to stand beside you. In the larger story, Peter's betrayal stands as one of the earliest and most impactful examples of how fear can change a person's path, how the desire to survive can lead to choices that cause harm to others, and how the consequences of those choices can continue long after the moment has passed. It also serves as a reminder that loyalty is not just about words or shared history, but about actions, about the decisions made when things become difficult, and about the willingness to stand firm even when fear is present. In the end, Peter Pettigrew's role is not just that of a traitor, but of a person who allowed fear to guide his actions, who chose safety over trust, and who lived with the consequences of that choice in a way that never truly allowed him to escape it, showing that betrayal, once made, does not simply disappear, but becomes part of the story, shaping everything that follows in ways that cannot be undone. Barty Crouch Jr. Deception in plain sight. In a world where danger often hides behind shadows and dark corners, there is something even more unsettling about danger that stands in plain sight, something that speaks calmly, offers guidance, and earns trust, all while quietly leading someone toward harm. And this is exactly what unfolds through the actions of Barty Crouch Jr., a figure whose betrayal is not sudden or loud, but slow, careful, and deeply calculated, unfolding over time in a way that is difficult to notice until it is far too late. At the center of this deception is the identity of Alastor Moody, a respected Auror known for his experience, his caution, and his deep understanding of dark magic. Someone who would naturally be trusted, especially within the walls of Hogwarts, where students rely on their teachers not only for knowledge, but for safety. When Barty Crouch Jr. takes on this identity, he does not simply imitate Moody's appearance, but studies his behavior, his voice, his habits, and his reputation, creating a version of him that feels real, believable, and consistent enough to avoid suspicion. This is where the deception becomes especially powerful, because it is not based on quick tricks or simple lies, but on careful observation and detailed performance, on the ability to maintain a role over a long period of time without breaking it. And in doing so, Barty places himself in a position of authority, a position where he can influence others, guide them, and shape their understanding of the world around them. Within this role, he is not seen as a threat, but as a protector, someone who prepares students for danger, someone who teaches them how to defend themselves, and someone who appears to stand on the side of safety. For Harry Potter, this presence becomes something important, because Moody is not just a teacher, but a guide during a time that is already filled with uncertainty, especially with the start of the Triwizard Tournament, a competition that brings with it challenges, risk, and the need for guidance. Harry, still learning and still trying to understand his place in the magical world, looks to those around him for support, and in Moody, he finds someone who appears to offer exactly that. This is where trust begins to form, not instantly, but through repeated interactions, through lessons, through advice, and through moments where Moody seems to show understanding and awareness of Harry's situation. He teaches him, encourages him, and at times even appears to protect him, creating a relationship that feels genuine, that feels safe, and that allows Harry to lower his guard, to believe that he has someone on his side within the school. But beneath this surface, something else is happening, something carefully planned and controlled, because every action taken by Barty Crouch Jr. is part of a larger goal, a goal that is not centered on Harry's safety, but on his movement, on guiding him step by step toward a specific outcome. This guidance is not obvious, because it is woven into normal interactions, into suggestions that seem helpful, into advice that appears reasonable, and into moments that feel natural within the context of the tournament. The Triwizard Tournament itself becomes the stage for this manipulation, because it provides a structure, a series of tasks that Harry must complete, each one bringing him closer to the final event. And within this structure, Barty positions himself as a quiet guide, someone who offers just enough help to ensure that Harry continues forward, even when the challenges seem too difficult. He does not push too hard, does not reveal too much, but instead adjusts his influence carefully, making sure that Harry remains on the path that has been designed for him. This is where betrayal takes on a different form, because it is not based on breaking trust suddenly, but on building that trust slowly, only to use it later for a different purpose. Harry believes that Moody is helping him survive the tournament, that he is being supported in a dangerous situation, but in reality, each piece of guidance, each moment of assistance, is leading him closer to a place of danger that he does not yet understand. What makes this manipulation even more unsettling is the level of precision involved, because nothing is left to chance, nothing is accidental, and every detail is considered, from the way Moody interacts with others to the way he responds to events within the school. Barty Crouch Jr. maintains his role carefully, making sure that his behavior matches expectations, that his knowledge appears consistent, and that there are no clear signs that something is wrong. There is also a deeper layer to this deception, because Barty does not simply guide Harry physically, but also shapes his thinking, influences his decisions, and creates a sense of confidence that keeps him moving forward. When Harry faces challenges, when he doubts himself, Moody is there with advice, with direction, and with encouragement, reinforcing the idea that he can succeed, and in doing so, ensuring that he continues to follow the path that has been set for him. This combination of trust and control creates a powerful dynamic, because it allows Barty to move without resistance, to guide without being questioned, and to shape events in a way that feels natural rather than forced. Harry does not see the danger because the danger is not presented as something separate, but as part of the support he believes he is receiving. As the tournament progresses and the final task approaches, the pieces of the plan begin to come together, and the full impact of the deception becomes clear, because the goal has never been Harry's success, but his arrival at a specific place, a moment where the truth can no longer be hidden, where the guidance he has followed leads directly into danger. The trust that has been built over time is revealed as a tool, something that has been used to guide rather than protect. When the truth is finally uncovered, when Barty Crouch Jr. is revealed for who he really is, the weight of the betrayal becomes clear, not just in the immediate danger that Harry faces, but in the realization that someone he trusted, someone who appeared to support him, was in fact working against him the entire time. This realization is not just about the event itself, but about the nature of trust, about how easily it can be shaped, and about how difficult it can be to see through something that feels real. In the larger story, this moment stands as one of the clearest examples of deception in plain sight, because it shows that danger does not always hide, that it can exist within trusted roles, within familiar faces, and within structures that are meant to provide safety. It also highlights the idea that betrayal is not always immediate, but can develop over time through careful planning, through patience, and through the ability to remain unnoticed. For Harry, this experience becomes another lesson, another moment where trust is tested and where the complexity of the world around him becomes more clear, because it shows that not all threats are visible and that understanding who to trust is not always simple. It adds to his growing awareness that the world he is part of is filled with layers, with hidden intentions, and with challenges that go beyond what can be seen on the surface. In the end, Barty Crouch Jr. actions reveal a form of betrayal that is built on manipulation and precision, a betrayal that uses trust as a pathway rather than breaking it immediately, and in doing so, creates a situation where the truth is hidden not by absence, but by presence, by the careful construction of a reality that feels safe until the moment it is no longer possible to ignore what has been happening all along. Gilderoy Lockhart, fame over responsibility. In a world where stories carry weight and where names can become larger than the people who hold them, there is a special kind of power in reputation. Because when enough people believe in a version of someone, that version can begin to feel real, even if it is built on something fragile, something incomplete, or something entirely false. And in the case of Gilderoy Lockhart, this idea becomes clear in a way that is both fascinating and unsettling, because his betrayal is not built on open harm or direct conflict, but on illusion, on the careful construction of an identity that places fame above truth and recognition above responsibility. From the moment he enters Hogwarts, Lockhart presents himself as a hero, a figure of confidence and charm, someone who has faced danger and emerged victorious time and time again. And his stories are filled with adventure, with challenges that have been overcome, and with enemies that have been defeated through skill and bravery. These stories are not shared quietly, but openly, repeated often, and supported by books, photographs, and public admiration, creating an image that is difficult to question, especially for those who do not yet have the experience to see beyond the surface. For many students, including Harry Potter, Lockhart's presence is initially something impressive because he represents the idea of success, of recognition, and of a life where actions lead to admiration. But as time passes, small details begin to appear, small moments where the image does not fully match reality, moments where his knowledge seems limited, where his confidence appears forced, and where his actions do not align with the stories he tells. These inconsistencies are not immediately clear because Lockhart is skilled at maintaining his persona, at redirecting attention, and at ensuring that his reputation remains intact. But beneath this carefully built surface lies a truth that is far less impressive. A truth that reveals that his stories are not his own, that the achievements he claims belong to others, and that his role in those events is not that of a hero, but of an observer who has chosen to take credit rather than responsibility. This is where the betrayal begins to take shape, because it is not just about false stories, but about the way those stories are used to create trust, to gain admiration, and to secure a position of influence, especially within a place like Hogwarts, where students rely on their teachers for guidance and protection. Lockhart's role as a professor is not simply about teaching, but about shaping how students understand the world. And when that role is built on falsehood, the impact extends beyond personal reputation into the lives of those who are learning from him. For Harry and Ron Weasley, this realization comes gradually, through moments where Lockhart's lack of real skill becomes more visible, and through situations where his response to danger does not match the courage he claims to have shown in his stories. Instead of stepping forward with confidence, he hesitates, avoids responsibility, and seeks ways to remove himself from risk, revealing that his true priority is not helping others, but protecting himself. The turning point arrives when the truth can no longer be hidden, when the situation demands real action, and when Lockhart's carefully constructed image begins to break under the pressure of reality. Faced with a dangerous situation, one that requires genuine skill and courage, Lockhart does not rise to the challenge, but instead chooses a different path, one that reveals the depth of his deception and the nature of his betrayal. In this moment, he attempts to use magic not to protect Harry and Ron, not to solve the problem they are facing, but to erase their memories, to remove their knowledge of what they have seen and learned, and in doing so, to preserve his own reputation. This choice is not made in confusion or panic alone, but in alignment with everything that has defined his behavior. Because throughout his life, Lockhart has relied on memory charms to remove the truth from others, to take their stories and make them his own, and to ensure that no one remains who can challenge his version of events. This act reveals something important about his character, because it shows that his betrayal is not accidental, not a single mistake, but part of a pattern, a repeated choice to place his own image above the truth, to value recognition over honesty, and to see others not as people to be helped, but as obstacles to be managed. The attempt to erase Harry and Ron's memories is not just about avoiding responsibility, but about maintaining control, about ensuring that the story he has created continues without interruption. What makes this moment especially significant is the way it contrasts with the expectations placed on him, because as a teacher, as a figure of authority, he is expected to guide and protect, to use his knowledge for the benefit of others, and to act with integrity, but instead, he uses his position to manipulate, to deceive, and to prioritize his own safety above the well-being of those who trust him. The failure of his spell, caused by a broken wand, prevents the immediate success of his plan, but it does not change the intention behind it, and it is this intention that defines the betrayal, because it shows that when faced with the choice between truth and self-preservation, Lockhart chooses himself, choosing to protect his image, even at the cost of others' safety and understanding. For Harry, this experience becomes another lesson, another moment where trust is tested, and where the difference between appearance and reality becomes clear, because it shows that not all heroes are what they seem, that reputation can be misleading, and that true courage is not found in stories, but in actions. It also reinforces the idea that authority does not always mean reliability, and that even those placed in positions of respect can fail in their responsibilities. For Ron, the experience carries its own weight, because it is his broken wand that causes the spell to backfire, creating an unexpected outcome that changes the direction of the moment. And while this prevents the loss of memory for both of them, it also highlights the unpredictability of situations where truth and deception collide. In the larger story, Lockhart's role serves as a reminder that betrayal does not always come from clear enemies or from those who openly oppose the main characters, but can also come from those who seem friendly, who seem helpful, and who present themselves as allies. It shows that deception can exist within charm, that falsehood can hide within confidence, and that the desire for recognition can lead to choices that harm others in ways that are not always immediately visible. His actions also highlight the importance of truth, not just as a concept, but as a responsibility, something that must be protected and respected, especially by those who hold influence over others. When truth is replaced by false stories, when reality is changed to fit a desired image, the result is not just personal success, but a system where trust becomes fragile, where understanding becomes uncertain, and where those who rely on that truth are left without the guidance they need. In the end, Gilderoy Lockhart's betrayal is not one of sudden violence or open conflict, but of illusion, of carefully maintained falsehood, and of a final choice that reveals the true priority behind his actions, showing that when fame is placed above responsibility, and when self-preservation is chosen over honesty, the result is a kind of betrayal that may not always be loud, but is deeply impactful, shaping the way others see the world and the people within it. Draco Malfoy, rivalry and reluctance. There are some forms of betrayal that do not begin with a single decision, but grow slowly over time, shaped by family, by belief, and by the quiet pressure to become what others expect. And in the story of Draco Malfoy, this kind of betrayal is not simple or direct, but layered, uncertain, and often filled with moments where choice and doubt exist side by side. Unlike others who betray through clear actions or hidden plans, Draco's path is shaped by where he comes from, by what he is taught, and by the struggle between what he has learned and what he begins to feel as the world around him changes. From the moment he is introduced, Draco stands in contrast to Harry Potter, not just in personality, but in the values he expresses and the way he sees the world. He is confident, proud, and often dismissive, carrying with him the influence of his family, especially his father, Lucius Malfoy, whose beliefs shape Draco's understanding of what matters and who deserves respect. Within this influence lies an ideology that divides people, that places value on blood status, and that encourages a sense of superiority over those seen as different. This alignment with harmful ideas does not come from Draco creating them himself, but from absorbing them, from growing up in an environment where these beliefs are treated as normal, as correct, and as something to be carried forward. For Draco, these ideas become part of his identity, something he expresses openly through his words and actions, often targeting Harry and his friends, especially those who do not fit into his view of what is acceptable. This behavior, while sometimes dismissed as simple rivalry, carries deeper meaning because it reflects a system of belief that can lead to harm, even when it is not fully understood by the person expressing it. Throughout his time at Hogwarts, Draco often acts in ways that create danger for Harry, not always through direct attack, but through enabling situations where harm becomes possible. He supports those who oppose Harry, aligns himself with forces that seek control, and at times contributes to plans or actions that place others at risk. These moments are not always central to the larger events, but they build a pattern, a series of choices that show where his loyalty lies, and how his actions, even when not leading directly to harm, still contribute to an environment where danger is allowed to grow. One of the most important aspects of Draco's role is the way his actions are connected to expectation, because as he grows older, the pressure placed upon him increases, not just from within his family, but from the larger world that his family is connected to. He is expected to continue the beliefs he has been taught, to align himself with power, and to prove his loyalty in ways that go beyond words. This expectation becomes more serious as the influence of Lord Voldemort grows stronger, and as the world around Draco becomes more dangerous and more divided. When Draco is given tasks that involve real risk, that involve direct involvement in dangerous plans, the difference between belief and reality begins to appear more clearly, because it is one thing to speak with confidence, to express ideas that seem strong, but it is another to act on those ideas when the consequences become real, when the possibility of harm is no longer distant, but immediate. In these moments, Draco's behavior begins to change, not completely, but enough to show that something within him is shifting. There are times when he hesitates, times when his confidence fades, and times when the weight of what he is expected to do becomes visible in his expression, in his actions, and in the way he carries himself. This does not erase the harm he has contributed to, nor does it remove the choices he has made, but it introduces a new layer to his character, one that shows that his alignment with harmful ideas is not as solid as it once appeared. The tension between upbringing and inner conflict becomes one of the defining elements of Draco's story, because he is caught between what he has been taught and what he begins to understand, between the desire to meet expectations and the growing awareness that those expectations may lead to consequences he is not prepared to face. This tension does not always lead to clear decisions, and often leaves Draco in a space of uncertainty, where he continues to act in ways that align with his past, even as his internal response begins to shift. For Harry, Draco remains an opponent, someone who creates obstacles, who speaks with hostility, and who represents a different side of the conflict that defines much of his time at Hogwarts. But as the story progresses, the nature of that opposition becomes more complex, because it is no longer just about rivalry, but about the choices each of them is making, and the paths they are following in a world that is becoming more dangerous with each passing moment. There are key moments where Draco's role in enabling danger becomes especially clear, where his actions contribute to events that place others at risk. And while he may not always be the one carrying out the final act, his involvement, his support, and his willingness to continue along that path all play a part in what unfolds. These moments highlight the idea that betrayal is not always about a single action, but about participation, about being part of something that leads to harm, even if that harm is not directly caused by one person alone. At the same time, there are also moments where Draco's hesitation suggests that he is not entirely comfortable with what he is doing. Moments where the reality of the situation becomes too heavy to ignore, and where the distance between belief and action becomes difficult to maintain. These moments do not transform him immediately, do not erase his past behavior, but they do show that change is possible, even if it is slow, even if it is uncertain, and even if it is incomplete. In the larger story, Draco's journey serves as a reflection of how people can be shaped by their environment, how beliefs can be passed down and accepted without question, and how difficult it can be to step away from those beliefs when they are tied to identity, family, and expectation. It also shows that betrayal can exist in this space, not just as a clear act of turning against someone, but as a continued alignment with ideas and actions that lead to harm, even when doubt begins to grow. For Harry, understanding Draco is not necessary for survival, but it becomes part of the larger picture, part of the realization that the world is not divided simply into clear sides, but filled with individuals who are navigating their own paths, making their own choices, and facing their own struggles. This does not excuse the harm that Draco causes, but it places it within a context that allows for deeper understanding, showing that not all betrayal is driven by hatred alone, but can also come from fear, pressure, and the inability to break away from what has been taught. In the end, Draco Malfoy's role is one of contrast and complexity, a character who stands close to betrayal, who participates in it, but who also reveals the possibility of change, showing that even within harmful systems, even within strong expectations, there can exist moments of doubt, moments of hesitation, and moments where a different path begins to appear, even if it is not fully taken. Severus Snape, the longest question of loyalty. There are some people in a story who are easy to understand, whose actions follow a clear path that can be traced from beginning to end. But there are also those whose choices seem to move in shadows, whose words and actions do not always match in simple ways, and whose place between loyalty and betrayal becomes one of the most difficult questions to answer. And in the world of Harry Potter series, few figures represent this complexity more than Severus Snape, a man whose life is shaped by decisions that are both damaging and protective, both distant and deeply connected, and whose story forces us to look closely at what loyalty truly means. To understand Snape, it is important to begin not with what he becomes, but with what he once was, because his path does not start in a place of clear intention, but in a space of uncertainty, of longing, and of choices that carry consequences he does not fully understand at the time. One of the most important moments in this early path is his connection to the prophecy, the words that describe a child who would have the power to defeat Lord Voldemort, words that Snape overhears and then chooses to share, not knowing exactly how they will be used, but knowing enough to understand that they are important. This decision to pass the prophecy along becomes one of the earliest and most significant points in the question of Snape's loyalty, because it directly leads to the targeting of Lily Potter and her family, setting into motion the events that will result in her death and the shaping of Harry's life. At this moment, Snape's actions can be seen as a betrayal, because he chooses to serve a power that values control and domination, and in doing so, he becomes part of a chain of events that leads to loss and suffering. But even within this moment, there is something that complicates the picture, because Snape's reaction to what follows is not one of indifference, but of regret, of a realization that the consequences of his choice are far greater than he intended, and that the harm caused cannot be undone. This regret becomes the beginning of a shift, a movement away from the path he was on and towards something else, something that is not immediately clear, but that will define his actions for years to come. From this point forward, Snape's life becomes one of quiet contradiction, because while he continues to operate in a space close to danger, close to those who would harm others, he is also working in a way that suggests a different kind of loyalty, one that is not easily seen, one that does not seek recognition, and one that requires him to maintain a role that often appears harsh, distant, and even cruel. This is where his behavior at Hogwarts becomes especially important, because it is through his interactions with students, especially Harry, that much of his character is revealed, or at least seems to be revealed. At Hogwarts, Snape is not a gentle teacher, not someone who offers comfort or encouragement in a clear and open way, but instead presents himself as strict, critical, and often unfair, especially toward Harry. His words are sharp, his tone is cold, and his actions create an environment where Harry feels watched, judged, and often misunderstood. This treatment, repeated over time, builds a sense of tension between them, a relationship that is defined more by conflict than by understanding. For Harry, this behavior feels like a personal attack, something that goes beyond normal discipline or teaching and becomes a source of frustration and confusion because Snape's actions do not seem to have a clear reason, at least not one that is openly explained. He appears to favor other students, to hold Harry to a different standard, and to take every opportunity to challenge him, creating the impression that his loyalty lies elsewhere, that he is not to be trusted, and that his role within the school is not as straightforward as it should be. This is where the question of betrayal becomes more complicated, because from Harry's perspective, Snape's actions can easily be seen as a form of betrayal, not in the sense of a single event, but in the ongoing way he treats him, the lack of support, the absence of kindness, and the constant pressure that makes Harry feel isolated, even within a place that should offer some level of safety. These experiences shape Harry's view of Snape, reinforcing the idea that he is someone who stands on the opposite side, someone whose loyalty is uncertain at best. However, as the story unfolds, small details begin to suggest that there is more happening beneath the surface, moments where Snape's actions, while still harsh, do not align completely with the idea of simple betrayal. There are times when he intervenes, when he protects, and when he takes risks that do not benefit him directly, and these moments begin to create a sense that his role is not as clear as it once seemed. The idea of sacrifice becomes central to understanding Snape's character, because much of what he does requires him to give up something important, not just in terms of safety, but in terms of how he is seen by others. He does not seek recognition for his actions, does not explain his reasons, and does not attempt to correct the misunderstandings that surround him. And this creates a situation where he is often judged based on what is visible rather than what is hidden. This hidden aspect of his life, the part that exists beyond what is openly shown, is where the question of loyalty becomes most difficult, because it suggests that his actions, while sometimes appearing harmful, may be part of a larger effort to protect, to maintain balance, and to work toward a goal that is not immediately visible. This does not erase the pain caused by his behavior, nor does it remove the impact of his earlier choices, but it adds a layer of complexity that challenges the idea of simple labels. The blurred line between betrayal and sacrifice is not something that can be easily defined, because it exists in the space where intention and action do not always match, where the reasons behind a choice are not immediately clear, and where the consequences of that choice can be both positive and negative at the same time. In Snape's case, this line is especially difficult to see, because he operates in a way that keeps his true intentions hidden, even from those who might benefit from understanding them. For Harry, coming to understand Snape is not a quick process, but a gradual one, shaped by new information, by revelations that change the way past events are seen, and by the realization that not all loyalty is visible and not all betrayal is intentional. This shift in understanding does not erase the experiences he has had, but it does change the way he interprets them, allowing for a more complete view of who Snape is and what he has done. In the larger story, Snape's role serves as a reminder that people are not always defined by a single action, that loyalty can take forms that are difficult to recognize, and that sacrifice often requires a level of silence that can be mistaken for indifference or even opposition. His story challenges the idea that betrayal is always clear and that loyalty is always visible, showing instead that both can exist within the same person, shaped by different moments, different choices, and different reasons. In the end, Severus Snape stands as one of the most complex figures in Harry's world, a character whose actions cannot be easily placed into simple categories, and whose life reflects the difficult balance between past mistakes and present choices, between visible behavior and hidden intention, and between the pain of what has been done and the possibility of what can still be given. Albus Dumbledore, the burden of secrets. In a world where knowledge can protect or endanger, where truth can guide but also burden, there is a quiet weight carried by those who know more than they say. And in the life of Albus Dumbledore, that weight becomes one of the most defining parts of his role, not because he lacks wisdom or care, but because the choices he makes about what to reveal and what to hide shape not only his own path, but the path of Harry Potter in ways that are both protective and deeply complicated. From the beginning, Dumbledore is seen as a figure of trust, someone who understands the world more clearly than others, someone who appears calm even in moments of danger, and someone who holds knowledge that others rely on. But this position also creates a challenge, because knowing more often means deciding what others are ready to hear. And in Dumbledore's case, that decision is not simple, because the truth he carries is not just information, but something heavier, something that could change how Harry sees himself and his place in the world. One of the most important aspects of Dumbledore's actions is his choice to withhold critical truths, not because he wishes to deceive in a harmful way, but because he believes that timing matters. That understanding must come in stages, and that revealing everything too early could cause confusion, fear, or even harm. This belief shapes many of his decisions, leading him to share only what he feels is necessary at a given moment, while keeping other details hidden until a later time. However, this approach, while thoughtful in intention, creates a distance between him and Harry, because trust is not only built on protection, but also on openness. And when important parts of the truth are delayed, it can begin to feel like something is missing, like there are pieces of the story that are being kept out of reach. For Harry, who is growing up in a world filled with uncertainty, this absence becomes something he can sense, even if he cannot fully explain it, a feeling that there is more he is not being told. As Harry's journey continues, the idea that he is part of something larger becomes clearer, especially in relation to Lord Voldemort, whose connection to him is not only external, but deeply personal. And it is within this connection that Dumbledore's silence becomes most significant, because he understands the full meaning of that connection long before Harry does, and he chooses not to reveal it completely until a much later point. This decision is tied to a deeper plan, one that involves Harry's role in the eventual confrontation with Voldemort, a role that is not simple or easy, but one that carries with it the possibility of sacrifice, the idea that Harry may have to face a moment where his own life becomes part of what must be given in order to end the threat that has shaped his existence. This truth is not something that can be shared lightly, not something that can be explained without consequence, and Dumbledore knows this, which is why he waits, why he chooses to guide rather than fully reveal. Raising Harry with this hidden purpose is one of the most complex parts of Dumbledore's actions, because it means that every decision, every piece of guidance, and every moment of support is influenced by something that Harry does not yet know, something that exists in the background of his life, shaping the way he is prepared for what lies ahead. This preparation is not direct, but subtle, encouraging Harry to grow stronger, to think carefully, and to develop the kind of resilience that will be needed in the future. At the same time, This approach creates a tension because it means that Harry is being guided toward a path he does not fully understand. A path that includes risks and responsibilities that have not been clearly explained to him. And this can feel like a form of betrayal, not because Dumbledore intends harm, but because the lack of full honesty creates a gap between what Harry believes and what is actually being planned. There are moments when this tension becomes visible, when Harry begins to question why certain things are not being explained, why certain decisions are made without his input, and why the truth seems to be just out of reach, always close, but never fully given. These moments are important because they show that trust is not only about believing in someone's intentions, but also about feeling included in the decisions that affect one's own life. Dumbledore's silence is not empty, but filled with thought, with concern, and with the desire to protect. Yet it also carries consequences, because silence, even when used carefully, can create misunderstandings, can lead to doubt, and can make it difficult for others to feel fully connected to the truth. For Harry, this means learning to navigate a relationship where trust exists, but is sometimes strained, where respect is present, but is challenged by the feeling that not everything is being shared. As the story moves forward and more of the truth is revealed, the impact of these earlier decisions becomes clearer, because Harry begins to understand not only what was hidden, but why it was hidden. And this creates a moment of reflection, a chance to see Dumbledore not just as a guide, but as a person who made difficult choices that were not perfect, but were made in the context of a larger goal. This understanding does not remove the sense of distance that may have been felt earlier, but it adds depth to it, allowing Harry to see the complexity behind the silence, to recognize that the burden of knowledge is not something easily carried, and that the decision to withhold truth is not always about control, but about timing, about readiness, and about the hope that revealing things at the right moment will lead to better outcomes. In the larger story, Dumbledore's role highlights the idea that leadership is not only about action, but about judgment, about deciding what to say, when to say it, and how much to reveal. And that these decisions, even when made with care, can have effects that are not always easy to predict. It shows that even those who are wise and experienced can face uncertainty, can struggle with the balance between honesty and protection, and can make choices that are both helpful and difficult at the same time. For Harry, this experience becomes part of his growth, teaching him that trust is not always simple, that even those he respects may not always share everything, and that understanding often comes gradually, through time, through experience, and through the willingness to look beyond first impressions. It also prepares him to make his own decisions, to consider not only what is right, but how and when to act, and to recognize the weight that comes with knowledge. In the end, the burden of secrets carried by Albus Dumbledore is not just about what is hidden, but about the responsibility that comes with knowing, about the choices that must be made when truth has the power to change everything, and about the delicate balance between protecting someone and preparing them for what they must eventually face, a balance that is never easy and never without consequence. Mundungus Fletcher, Cowardice in Crisis. In a world where danger often arrives without warning, and where protection depends not only on strength, but also on reliability, there are moments when even the smallest decision can carry a weight far greater than it seems. And in the life of Mundungus Fletcher, this idea becomes painfully clear, because his actions are not grand or powerful, not part of a carefully planned betrayal, but something quieter and more human, a moment of weakness that unfolds during a time when strength was needed most. And in that moment, the consequences reach far beyond what he may have expected. Mundungus is not introduced as a figure of great importance or authority, but rather as someone who exists on the edges of larger events, someone who is involved in the work of the Order of the Phoenix, but does not carry the same level of responsibility or trust as others within it. He is known for being unreliable, for having a tendency to avoid danger when possible, and for placing his own safety above duty. And while these traits may seem minor in less serious situations, They become critical when the stakes are high and when every person's role matters. At the time when the wizarding world is growing more dangerous, when the influence of Lord Voldemort is spreading and the need for vigilance is constant, Mundungus is given a role that, while not central, is still important, because protection does not rely only on the strongest members, but on the cooperation of everyone involved. Each person, no matter how small their role may seem, becomes part of a larger system, a network of watchfulness and care that is meant to keep others safe. One of the most critical moments in this system involves the protection of Harry Potter, whose safety is a priority for the Order, especially during times when movement is necessary and danger is expected. Plans are made carefully, with each member assigned a task, and within this structure, Mundungus is placed in a position where his presence, his attention, and his reliability are needed, not because he is the strongest, but because he is part of the whole. But this is where the weakness begins to show, because when the moment of action arrives, when the situation becomes real, and the risk is no longer distant, Mundungus makes a choice that reflects his nature, a choice driven by fear, by the instinct to escape rather than to endure. Instead of holding his position, instead of remaining where he is needed, he abandons his post, leaving a gap in the protection that had been carefully planned. This decision is not made with the intention of causing harm, but with the desire to avoid it, a reaction that may feel natural in a moment of fear, but one that carries consequences that extend far beyond the individual making the choice. When Mundungus disappears from his position, the structure of the plan begins to weaken, because each role depends on the others, and when one part fails, the entire system becomes more vulnerable. This vulnerability becomes especially significant in relation to Sirius Black, a figure who is already living in a state of risk, someone whose safety depends on careful planning and the support of those around him. Sirius is not just another member of the Order, but someone who carries a deep connection to Harry, someone who represents both protection and emotional support, and whose presence in Harry's life is important in ways that go beyond strategy. When Mundungus abandons his post, he does not directly cause harm to Sirius, but he contributes to a situation where the balance of protection is disrupted, where the careful planning that was meant to prevent danger begins to fail, and where the risk that had been managed begins to grow. This is where the idea of small betrayals becomes important, because not all betrayal comes from large, intentional actions, but from moments where responsibility is not upheld, where trust is not honored, and where the absence of action becomes as significant as action itself. The connection between Mundungus's choice and Sirius's vulnerability is not immediate or simple, but it is part of a chain of events, a series of moments that build upon each other, each one adding to the risk, each one creating a condition where danger becomes more likely. In this way, Mundungus's decision, while small in isolation, becomes part of a larger outcome, one that affects not only the immediate situation, but the broader story as it unfolds. What makes this form of betrayal especially complex is the lack of clear intention, because Mundungus does not act out of malice or a desire to harm others, but out of fear, out of the instinct to protect himself in a moment of crisis. This does not excuse the outcome, but it changes the way the action is understood, because it highlights the role of human weakness, the reality that not everyone responds to danger with courage, and that even those who are part of a larger effort can fail when the pressure becomes too great. For Harry, the impact of these events is not always directly connected to Mundungus in a clear way, but as the story develops and the connections between actions and consequences become more visible, the understanding of how small decisions can lead to larger outcomes becomes clearer. It becomes evident that safety is not guaranteed, that plans can fail, and that trust, once placed, must be supported by action, not just intention. For the Order, Mundungus's behavior serves as a reminder of the importance of reliability, of the need for each member to uphold their role, and of the risks that arise when even one part of the system breaks down. It also highlights the challenge of working with individuals who are not equally prepared for the demands of the situation, who may struggle under pressure, and who may not always act in ways that support the larger goal. In the larger story, Mundungus Fletcher represents a different kind of betrayal, one that is not driven by ideology or alignment with opposing forces, but by the simple and very human response to fear, a response that leads to avoidance, to withdrawal, and to the failure to act when action is needed. This type of betrayal is often overlooked because it does not involve dramatic conflict or clear opposition, but its impact can be just as significant because it creates gaps, weaknesses, and opportunities for danger to enter. The idea that small betrayals can have devastating consequences is one of the most important lessons in this part of the story, because it shows that not all actions need to be large to matter, that even a single moment of failure can influence the outcome of events in ways that are not immediately visible. It also shows that responsibility is not just about intention, but about follow-through, about being present, and about standing firm even when it is difficult. In the end, Mundungus Fletcher's role is not one of a central villain or a powerful force, but of a reminder, a quiet example of how fear and avoidance can lead to outcomes that affect others deeply, showing that in a world where every role matters, even the smallest act of abandonment can leave a lasting impact, shaping events in ways that cannot easily be undone. Creature, loyalty turned against itself. In the quiet corners of old houses, where time seems to move more slowly and memories stay longer than they should, there are stories that do not begin with action, but with habit, with long years of repetition, and with a kind of loyalty that has been shaped so deeply that it no longer asks questions. And within the walls of Grimald Place, this kind of story can be seen through the life of Creature, a house elf whose actions cannot be understood without looking closely at the past that shaped him, the rules that guided him, and the pain that stayed with him long after it should have faded. Creature is not simply a servant in the usual sense, because his loyalty is not based on choice alone, but on something older and more binding, something that connects him to the House of Black and to the family that once held power within it, especially to Regulus Black, whose kindness toward him created a bond that would last far beyond Regulus's life. This bond is not loud or openly expressed, but it is strong, rooted in memory, in respect, and in a sense of belonging that Creature does not easily transfer to others. When the ownership of the house changes, when Sirius Black becomes Creature's master, the situation becomes complicated. Because Sirius does not share the same values as the rest of his family, and his treatment of Creature reflects not only his rejection of the Black family's beliefs, but also his own frustration with the house and everything connected to it. This creates a tension because Creature's loyalty is tied to the old ways, to the traditions and beliefs that Sirius has chosen to reject, and as a result, Creature does not fully accept Sirius as a master in the way that might be expected. This tension is not always visible in direct conflict, but it exists in the way Creature speaks, in the way he behaves, and in the quiet resistance that shapes his actions. His loyalty remains directed toward the past, toward the memory of Regulus and the values of the Black family, even when those values no longer align with the present. And this is where the idea of loyalty turning against itself begins to take form, because loyalty, when fixed in one place, can become a barrier to change, a force that prevents new connections from forming. For Harry Potter, this situation is not immediately clear, because Creature's behavior appears confusing, sometimes hostile, and often distant, and without understanding the history behind it, it is difficult to see why Creature acts the way he does. But beneath this behavior is a pattern, a consistent alignment with the past, a refusal to fully accept new bonds, and a quiet resistance to the authority that has replaced the one he once respected. This becomes especially important during a crucial moment, when Harry seeks information, when he needs clarity, and when the choices he makes depend on the accuracy of what he is told. In this moment, Creature does not respond with full honesty, does not provide the information in a way that reflects the present reality, but instead shapes his response in a way that aligns with his own understanding. with his own loyalties, and with the version of events that he believes to be correct. By misleading Harry, even if not through direct lies but through omission and selective truth, Creature contributes to a misunderstanding, a gap between what Harry believes and what is actually happening. And in a situation where timing and accuracy are critical, this gap becomes dangerous. Harry acts on the information he has, trusting that it is complete, and this trust, placed in a moment of urgency, becomes a pathway toward risk, because the guidance he receives is not fully aligned with reality. This act is not driven by a desire to harm Harry directly, but by the weight of Creature's past, by the conditioning that has shaped his understanding of loyalty, and by the belief that his actions are justified within that framework. This is what makes his betrayal different, because it is not based on simple intention, but on a deeper structure of belief, one that has been built over time and reinforced through experience. Creature's life is marked by pain, not always in visible ways, but in the way he has been treated, in the way he has been spoken to, and in the way his identity has been shaped by the expectations of those around him. His loyalty to Regulus is not just about duty, but about the memory of being treated with a level of respect and care that he did not always receive elsewhere. And this memory becomes something he holds onto, something that defines his actions, even when the world around him has changed. This connection between pain and loyalty is important, because it shows that betrayal can grow out of hurt, out of the need to hold on to something that once felt right, even if that something no longer fits the present. Creature's actions are shaped by this need, by the desire to remain connected to the past, and by the difficulty of letting go of what has been lost. At the same time, his behavior highlights the limits of loyalty when it is not flexible, when it does not adapt to new situations, and when it remains fixed in a way that prevents growth. Loyalty, when tied too strongly to one idea or one moment, can become something that blocks understanding, that prevents new relationships from forming, and that leads to actions that do not align with current needs. For Harry, the experience with Creature becomes a lesson in understanding complexity, in recognizing that not all actions are simple, and that people, or beings, act based on what they have known, what they have felt, and what they have been taught. It also shows that trust must be built carefully, that it requires not only intention but clarity, and that without understanding the past, it can be difficult to interpret the present. As the story continues, there are moments where Creature begins to change, where new bonds begin to form, and where his loyalty starts to shift, not completely, but enough to show that even deeply rooted behavior can evolve over time. These changes do not erase what has happened, but they add another layer to his character, showing that growth is possible, even for those who have been shaped by long years of conditioning. In the larger story, Creature represents a form of betrayal that is not driven by power or fear alone, but by history, by memory, and by the way pain can influence loyalty in ways that are not immediately visible. His actions remind us that betrayal is not always about turning against someone intentionally, but can also come from holding too tightly to something that no longer fits, from acting on beliefs that have not been questioned, and from the difficulty of adapting to change. In the end, Creature's story is one of complexity, of a loyalty that does not easily shift, and of the ways in which past experiences can shape present actions, showing that understanding someone's behavior often requires looking beyond the moment itself and into the deeper layers that have built up over time, layers of memory, of feeling, and of belief that continue to influence every choice they make. The prophecy itself, fate as betrayal. There are moments in the wizarding world when the danger does not come from a person, not from a choice made in anger or fear, but from something quieter and more distant, something that exists before decisions are made and continues long after, something that feels fixed even when people try to move away from it. And this is where the idea of the prophecy begins to take shape, not just as a set of words, but as a force that influences lives in ways that are difficult to see at first, yet impossible to ignore as events unfold. The prophecy connected to Harry Potter is not simply a prediction about the future, but a statement that ties him to Lord Voldemort in a way that goes beyond ordinary conflict, creating a link that exists whether Harry understands it or not, and whether he accepts it or not. These words, spoken long before Harry is able to hear them himself, describe a path that seems already shaped, a path where one must face the other, where their lives are connected in a way that cannot easily be separated. What makes this situation especially complex is that Harry does not choose this connection. He does not ask to be part of it, and he does not understand it fully until much later. Yet from the very beginning, it shapes the way others see him, the way decisions are made around him, and the way his life begins to unfold. This creates a sense that his path is not entirely his own, that something beyond his control has already placed him in a position where certain outcomes seem more likely, and where certain choices feel almost expected. The idea of being bound to a path that was never chosen is one of the most difficult parts of this situation, because it challenges the basic understanding of freedom, the belief that each person has control over their own life, and that their decisions shape their future. For Harry, this belief is important because it allows him to act with purpose, to make choices based on what he believes is right, and to feel that his actions matter. But the presence of the prophecy introduces a question, a quiet doubt about how much of that control truly exists. If the prophecy states that Harry and Voldemort are connected, that one cannot live while the other survives, then it raises the question of whether Harry's choices are truly his own, or whether they are influenced by something that has already been set in motion. This creates an illusion, a sense that free will is present, while at the same time suggesting that certain outcomes are already determined, and this tension between choice and destiny becomes one of the most important themes in understanding Harry's journey. However, the prophecy itself does not act on its own. It does not force actions, and it does not move people like pieces on a board, but instead exists as a piece of knowledge, something that gains power through the way it is interpreted and acted upon. In this sense, the prophecy is not the cause of events, but a guide that influences decisions, especially when it is taken seriously by those who hear it. One of the most important aspects of this influence can be seen in the reaction of Voldemort, who chooses to act on the prophecy, who decides that it must be fulfilled, and in doing so, takes steps that lead directly to the events that shape Harry's life, including the attack on his family. This choice shows that while the prophecy may describe a possible future, it is the actions taken in response to it that bring that future closer, turning possibility into reality. This creates an interesting question about responsibility, because if the prophecy sets the stage, but people choose how to act within that stage, then the line between destiny and choice becomes blurred, not clearly defined, but mixed together in a way that makes it difficult to separate one from the other. Harry's life is shaped by the prophecy, but it is also shaped by his own decisions, by the way he responds to the challenges he faces, and by the choices he continues to make as he grows. The idea that fate itself could be considered a form of betrayal comes from this tension, because betrayal is usually understood as a breaking of trust, as a moment where something expected is not fulfilled. And in the case of the prophecy, there is a sense that Harry has been placed in a situation without consent, that his life has been guided toward conflict without his agreement, and that the freedom he believes he has may not be as complete as it seems. From this perspective, fate can feel like something that has turned against him, something that has taken away the possibility of a normal life, something that has placed him in danger before he even understands what danger means. This feeling is not constant, but it appears in moments where the weight of his situation becomes clear, where the connection to Voldemort feels unavoidable, and where the idea of choice seems limited by the path that has already been laid out. At the same time, there is another way to understand this situation, one that suggests that while the prophecy describes a path, it does not control every step, and that within that path, there is still room for choice, still space for decisions that are not fixed or predetermined. Harry is not forced to act in a specific way. He is not controlled by the prophecy in his daily actions, and he continues to make choices that reflect his own values, his own beliefs, and his own understanding of what is right. This balance between destiny and free will is not simple, and it does not have a clear answer, because it exists in a space where both ideas are present at the same time, where the future is influenced but not completely defined, and where individuals must navigate their own path within a framework that has already been shaped by earlier events. For Harry, this means learning to accept that while some parts of his life are beyond his control, his response to those parts is still his own, and that even within a path that seems fixed, there are moments where choice matters, where actions can change outcomes, and where the direction of the story is not entirely decided in advance. In the larger story, the prophecy serves as a reminder that knowledge itself can carry weight, that knowing what might happen can influence what does happen, and that the way people respond to that knowledge is just as important as the knowledge itself. It also shows that fate, while powerful, is not absolute, and that the presence of a predicted future does not remove the importance of present decisions. In the end, the question of whether fate can be considered a betrayal does not have a single answer, because it depends on how it is understood, whether it is seen as something that limits freedom or something that guides it, and whether the focus is placed on what is predetermined or on what is still possible. What remains clear is that for Harry, the prophecy is both a burden and a guide, something that shapes his life while still leaving room for him to decide who he will be within it. And it is within this space, between what is written and what is chosen, that his true strength begins to appear. Reflection, betrayal, trust, and what remains. When we look back across the many moments that have shaped the life of Harry Potter, what begins to stand out is not just the number of times trust has been broken, but the different ways in which those breaks have happened. Because not all betrayal is the same, not all harm comes from the same place, and not all choices are made with the same intention. Some betrayals are clear, direct, and deliberate, made with full awareness of the damage they will cause, while others grow out of fear, confusion, or pain, shaped by past experiences and limited understanding. And this difference becomes important when we try to understand what remains after everything has unfolded. There are those who choose betrayal with intention, who act with knowledge, who understand the consequences and still move forward, placing their own safety, power, or belief above the trust that has been given to them. These actions carry a certain weight because they are deliberate, because they involve a clear turning away from loyalty, and because they often lead to outcomes that are both immediate and lasting. In these moments, trust is not just weakened, but broken in a way that is difficult to repair, because it is based on a decision that could have been different, but was not. At the same time, there are other moments that feel like betrayal, but come from a different place. Moments where the intention is not to harm, but the result still causes pain, where choices are made under pressure, under fear, or under the influence of past experiences that shape how a person responds. These actions are more difficult to understand, because they exist in a space between right and wrong, where the person involved may not fully see the impact of what they are doing, or may believe that they are acting in the best way they can at the time. This distinction does not erase the harm caused, because for the person experiencing the betrayal, the effect is still real, still present, and still something that must be processed. But it does change how we interpret those actions, because understanding intention allows us to see the full picture, to recognize that people are shaped by more than just the moment they are in, and that their choices are often influenced by things that are not immediately visible. In Harry's world, shaped by conflict, by danger, and by the constant presence of fear, trust becomes both essential and fragile, something that must be given in order to move forward, but something that is also at risk of being broken at any time. This creates a kind of tension that exists throughout his journey, because each new relationship, each new alliance, carries with it the possibility of support, but also the possibility of disappointment. The cost of trust in such a world is not small, because trusting someone means accepting the risk that they may fail, that they may act in ways that cause harm, or that they may not be able to meet the expectations placed upon them. This risk becomes even greater in a world where fear influences behavior, where people are forced to make difficult decisions quickly, and where the line between survival and loyalty is not always clear. Fear plays a central role in many of the betrayals Harry experiences, not always as a visible force, but as something that exists beneath the surface, shaping decisions and influencing actions. When people are afraid, they may choose safety over truth, silence over honesty, or distance over connection. And these choices, while understandable in context, can still lead to broken trust, to moments where expectations are not met and where relationships are strained. For Harry, growing up in this environment means learning to navigate these complexities, to recognize that not everyone who hurts him intends to do so, but also to understand that intention does not remove consequence. He learns that trust must be given carefully, but also that it cannot be withheld completely, because without trust, there can be no connection, no cooperation, and no progress. What becomes especially significant is Harry's ability to continue trusting despite everything he experiences, despite the repeated moments where that trust is challenged, and despite the evidence that suggests that trusting others can lead to pain. This ability is not based on naivety or a lack of awareness, but on a choice, a decision to believe that trust is still valuable, that relationships are still worth forming, and that the possibility of loyalty is still real. This choice is not easy because it requires strength, not the kind that is visible in physical action, but the kind that exists in thought, in belief, and in the willingness to remain open even after being hurt. It requires the ability to separate past experiences from present possibilities, to understand that each person is different, and to allow for the chance that trust can be honored, even when it has been broken before. There are moments where Harry could choose a different path, where he could close himself off, where he could rely only on himself and avoid the risk that comes with trusting others, but he does not take that path. And this decision becomes one of the most important parts of his character, because it allows him to build connections, to work with others, and to create a network of support that becomes essential in facing the challenges ahead. This does not mean that he trusts blindly or that he ignores the lessons he has learned, but rather that he carries those lessons with him, using them to guide his decisions, to recognize warning signs, and to approach relationships with a balance of openness and awareness. In this way, his ability to trust becomes stronger, not weaker, shaped by experience but not controlled by it. In the larger picture, the story of betrayal and trust in Harry's life reflects a broader truth about human relationships. The idea that trust is always a risk, that it requires vulnerability, and that it can be broken even when intentions are good. It also shows that betrayal, while painful, does not have to define the future, and that the ability to continue trusting is not a sign of weakness, but of resilience. As the journey comes to a close, what remains is not just a record of who betrayed Harry and how, but a deeper understanding of why those betrayals happened, what they reveal about the people involved, and how they shape the person Harry becomes. It is a story not only of loss, but of growth, not only of broken trust, but of the choice to rebuild it, and not only of fear, but of the courage to move forward despite it. In the end, betrayal may leave its mark, may change the way the world is seen, and may create moments of doubt, but it does not remove the possibility of trust, and it does not prevent the formation of new bonds. And it is within this balance, between what has been lost and what can still be built, that the true strength of Harry's story can be found, a strength that does not come from avoiding betrayal, but from continuing to believe that trust, even when fragile, is still worth holding on to. And now, as our journey through the many betrayals in the life of Harry Potter slowly comes to rest, the weight of each moment begins to soften, like distant echoes fading through the quiet halls of memory, where every choice, every mistake, and every act of loyalty settles gently into stillness. The voices that once felt loud and urgent grow calm, and the faces we have followed, some kind, some conflicted, some lost in their own fears, begin to drift like shadows at the edge of a quiet light. Perhaps what remains is not the pain of betrayal, but the quiet strength that followed it, the way trust, even when broken, found a way to return, softer, wiser, and more careful than before. The world itself feels calmer now, as if the storm has passed, leaving behind only a gentle silence. So as the story fades and the night grows still, you can let these thoughts drift away, like pages closing one by one, until nothing remains but a peaceful quiet. And in that quiet, you may now rest,